Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. My name is John Mitchell, and I'm the founder and guide of the YouTube channel Follow the Fishing. I begin this episode with a spectacular photo of a man and his guide posing with a permit, the gold medal of fly fishing on the saltwater flats. The composition of the permit photo appears to be choreographed, capturing the exuberance of the moment. It's the end game, the hope for results, the rare occasion where reality exceeds expectation. It's a wonder the event was captured in detail on film. Let's dial through today's saltwater snapshots to see what they say about fishing for permit on the flats. The first of our photos reveals a moody sky which is quickly losing the setting sun's light. I have caught many fine examples of many species at this time, when the big ones forsake deep water for a last meal of crabs inside the reef. Now follow along the horizon and you'll find the faces of fishermen displaying the genuine smiles only true joy can bring. I know because I am the guide who holds the permit, a great fish that to a degree changed my life. It's amazing how a brief encounter with a wild creature from another world can uplift you in the moment, all the more so that the memory can be relived clearly many years after the event. This is one of those times. So why all the fuss about permit, arguably the most prestigious and sought-after catch on the flats? What about bonefish and tarpon, two other species that make up the grand slam of fly fishing the flats? Both species are faster than the permit. I believe the simple answer is the permit are so damn hard to catch. The late fly fishing legend Lefty Kreh estimated that you need to make 1,000 decent casts to a permit before it will take your fly. Here are some of the reasons why. The permit is pelagic, spending most of its time in open seas. Forays into shallows generally take place during a rising tide when access to abundant nearshore crabs is at its best. The normally skittish permit become even more wary in the skinny water and easier to spook. With eyes that move close to 360 degrees, they can detect perceived threats from all directions, a quality that often ends a stalking session before the angler can move into casting range. The mirror-like finish of the permit reflects the fish's immediate surrounding, making them hard to spot even in close quarters. Look how the photo of the permit reflects the flash of the camera, while another cruising permit wears the dappled blue-green colors of the bottom. Permit also have a keen sense of smell. The fish depends on this fine-tuned sense to lead them to their prey. This is what I believe to be the leading factor as to why permit are so hard to catch. Put a chunk of conch or a piece of hermit crab in front of the wily permit, and the fish dumbs down fast and strikes. As such, fly fishing for permit is a manufactured challenge of man versus nature, a handicap of sorts, forcing the fisher to use carefully tied arrangements of strings and feathers to attract a fish whose eyesight is secondary to the normal way of feeding by smell. Sounds sort of crazy, eh? And hooking up the permit is only the start of the challenge. Now you have to touch the leader. Whether it's bonefish, tarpon, or permit, on the first run after the hookup, let the reel sing and play out line without interference. Here the quality of your rigging and the set of the drag is of utmost importance, as is letting your equipment do its job. After setting the hook, I like to hold the rod away from my body and keep my hands off the reel. Any sudden increase in the pressure on the line during these tense first minutes can cause your tippet to snap and your dreams to shatter. At the same time, our permit was hooked in a bay when the reef is only 150 yards from shore. In this situation, you have to get control of the fish fast. Now every jagged coral or folding, drifting flotsam is your enemy. You often have to chase after the fish, using the rod to steer the permit away from trouble while keeping constant pressure on the line. In between runs, permit often turn their broad bodies perpendicular to the fly line and hold their ground. While keeping the line tight, you need to be ready for a renewed burst of power. Any slack line gives the fish the chance to find a wraparound opportunity on a corer hud or a place to shake out its hook in the sandy bottom. If this happens, it's hasta luego permit. With all the roadblocks to success that come with fly fishing on the flats, you may wonder why I enjoy this type of saltwater fishing the most. The next photo, taken when our permit was first lifted from the water, explain why I find flats so compelling. All the essential equipment you need for a world-class experience is right before your eyes. Start with the polarized glasses, a must-see for seeing through water and keeping the fly out of your eye. No excuses on that one. To the right, you'll see my trusty Orvis 7-weight rig in the hands of a client. At the time, I hired out by the session as a package deal. 35 years and 1,000 flats fish later, I use that trusty rod and reel as my go-to saltwater combo. As author and outdoorsman Thomas McGuane says, some pieces of tackle have magical properties. I can't explain it, but it's true. On close inspection, you can see the lanyard hanging from my neck and holding the essential tools of the trade. A clipper's used for line management, a white box for holding spare flies, and a hemiostat used to free fish from the fly. The blue fanny pack is home to spare leaders in line, a hook sharpener, and other various items tuned to the day's request. Above all, what attracts me most to the flats is what you don't see in this photo. No boats, no motors, no trailers, nor any encroachments of the modern world upon the wild flats. I find it exhilarating stalking creatures through knee-deep water, alone and unprotected in an environment where you too can be eaten. Your escalating perception carries you away from the day-to-day and calls on senses buried since people settled into fixed agricultural lifestyles. You don't need to catch anything to enjoy being out here, but a great fish caught and released sure makes it all the sweeter. Before I proceed with snapshots of the hook permit in action, allow me to digress and enrich your perspective of this moment. This backstory of this episode of Follow the Fishing begins in the fall of 1982, when my wife Amber and I were asked to manage a remote fishing and diving resort named the Southern Cross Club, situated on Little Cayman Island. At the time, the Southern Cross Club was a work in progress as it transitioned from a private shareholders retreat to a public full-service resort. Little Cayman, lying 80 miles south of Cuba, is the smallest and least populated of the three Caymans, a mountaintop in the middle of nowhere. The island measures 10 miles long and 1 mile wide, with a barrier reef surrounding most of its coast. The Cayman Trench, just off the south side of the island, reaches depths of 4 miles. Unlike the Bahamas, Little Cayman is bereft of flats except for the thin slices of water lying between reef and shore. The relatively few fresh fish that dwell in these slivers are a wary, hard-to-catch lot. The Southern Cross Club job description was a bit fuzzy, but from what I could gather, it sounded pretty good to me. In 1982, all electricity on Little Cayman was provided by generator and all water supplied by cisterns. A barge based in Grand Cayman brought supplies when weather permitted. One phone in Blossom Village worked once in a while, providing the island's 30 or so residents with their only contact to the outside world. A mile of paved roads linked the two tracks that circled the island. Only a dozen or so vehicles were in service at that time. The best half belonged to the Southern Cross, along with 9 new Boston whalers of various sizes. The few tourist brochures that featured Little Cayman showed near-shore reefs of vibrant colors and lobsters crowding under staghorn coral. I had always been attracted to the adventurous side of life, and I could see at once that there was a lifetime opportunity shaping up before us. It is an understatement to say that I was pretty green in regards to Caribbean island life when we happened upon the Southern Cross Club job offer. I had fished salt water several times in Florida Keys, and for years, from various bar stools in Leelanau County, I marveled at novelist Jim Harrison's salacious stories featuring the likes of Tom McGuane, Jimmy Buffett, Hunter Thompson, Russell Chatham, to name a few. I wanted to be like these guys and hoped one day I'd have some salty stories of my own. But for the most part, this child of the Great Lakes didn't have a clue when it came to life in the tropics. However, the lack of experience on my part wasn't a serious problem because I wasn't the person the Southern Cross Club was aiming to hire. It was my wife, Anne Marie, then an executive at the resort within the Sleeping Bear Dunes in northern Michigan. She had the skill set to match the club's needs. My resume was a bit more eclectic. For several years after graduating from the University of Michigan, I migrated between New Orleans and the Leelanau Peninsula, renovating Victorian homes. I enjoyed the rhythm of changing with the seasons and developing multiple realities to live in. To add to the mix, Anne Marie and I had just celebrated our first wedding anniversary. We were young with 2 worlds of opportunity before us, adventurous enough to see how the cards played out. Before we signed on the dotted line, the board of the Southern Cross Club sent us to Little Cayman to see what we could make of it. It wasn't until we flew over the mysterious and giant island that is Cuba and the vast stretches of the Caribbean Sea that I realized how far off the beaten path we were going. Then the clouds parted before us, the sapphire waters turning white as they broke across the coral reef, palm trees bending in the wood. I remember thinking clearly as our plane banked towards the grass one way that whatever experience that lay before us would be well worth the living. As this fishing channel develops, I hope to share with you the agony and ecstasy of our early days on Little Cayman, then and now one of the wildest places on earth. But today's snapshot video belongs to the beautiful permit I am holding, caught nearly 8 years to the date after I stepped foot on this magical island. In the first of those 8 years, Anne-Marie and I served the Southern Cross Club well, refining the resort and building the occupancy while establishing formal fishing and diving operations. That first year also served as our second honeymoon. For 9 months after taking the job on Little Cayman, we were blessed with our son, Matt. Our relation with our beloved island changed, but kept on growing. While we remained based and employed in northern Michigan, we soon purchased a beautiful piece of property on the south side of Little Cayman where I built a tough, tiny house that is still standing today. By the time November 11th, 1991 rolled around, the date on the permit photos, I was getting to be a real conch, spending over 2 months every year on junkets to the island, obsessing daily over my bonefish count and figuring out how to live in a place where bread was $6 a loaf and lobsters and conch were free. It was a tough shift. The November 1991 date also marks the day I returned to the Southern Cross payroll, this time as an on-call fishing guide. I was the overflow guide, taking out guests when the 2 full-time pros were busy. When the word came down, I was scheduled for a late afternoon session with 2 first-time saltwater fishermen. It made me nervous. The mix sounded like a recipe for fouled lines and empty hooks, sending a first-time guide out with 2 saltwater virgins to find fish that were hard to catch under the best of circumstances. Believe me, the pressure was on. I knew my fishing game was not in the same league as my fellow Southern Cross Club guides. My casting range was modest. I bought flies rather than tied them, and I took more time to thread the eye of a fly than most guides needed to tie a finished knot, to name a few of my flaws. On the other side of the coin, I had lived off and on 2 of the last 8 years on Little Cayman. My constant wandering on the flats taught me where the fish would be as the day and tides progressed, when to approach the fish and when to wait for them to come to you, what type of fly they were likely to hit, and more. Thanks to friends who were professional guides, I had state-of-the-art equipment, a 5.6 and a 7.8 DXR Orvis reels with matching rods. I could also spot a tailing fish at 150 yards, and I hadn't lost a hooked fish in years. When I arrived that November afternoon at the Southern Cross Club to pick up my first clients as a professional guide, I felt I was up to the task. What happened on the flats over the next few hours sounds made up, but I assure you it's the whole truth and worth your time. When we arrived on the island's deserted north shore, I spent some time on basic casting techniques and the importance of line management with my two Northwestern airline pilots, my clients. As the lessons neared completion, up the coast I noticed nervous water close to shore. Then I caught a glimpse of two black tail fins rising, the sign of permit feasting on crabs below. I gave the heavier rod to the most promising caster, and his pilot jogged off to grab a camera from my truck. I had never come close to catching a permit, and I was excited, to say the least, that we had a legitimate shot. Up to now, I spent most of my time on Little Cayman chasing bonefish, where the chance of catching one of these remarkable speedsters was comparatively high. Only occasionally would I toss a perfunctory cast to a cruising permit, thinking that the results were preordained. This was in 1999, when fishing for permit on the fly was in its infancy, and most anglers considered catching permit without bait near impossible, a tilting of rods at windmills. The two of us moved slow and low towards the permit until I judged we were in danger of spooking the fish. The permit were working a sandy hole I was familiar with, and I noticed one of the tail fins was considerably bigger than the other. I tried to stay calm as I instructed my client to land the fly right in front of their eyes, hoping one makes a mistake. The client cast out 3 or 4 times, but the 30 feet he could muster wasn't getting the job done. I knew permit didn't stay in the same place too long, and any second now they could dart off to better crabbing grounds. The pilot turned to me and silently shrugged his shoulders. Then I did something that a guide with any amount of experience would have never done, and that is, I asked the client to hand me the 8-weight rod and let me take a shot at the permit. An experienced guide would have thought twice before taking a rod from a client, especially with the prize so close. I didn't have time to think about it, nor the experience to know I might be out of line. I was happy when the pilot smiled as we switched rods. I took it as his concession that one of us better get a hook in one of those damn fine fish. I didn't need a false cast to cover the 40 feet to the eating permit. My camel-colored burley crusher fly laid out perfectly and dropped right in front of the pair. Without hesitation, I felt the shock on the line, and the water in the hole exploded. The two fish scattered in different directions, and then I saw that the biggest one had taken my fly. As the permit sped relentlessly through the fly line and into the backing, I thought, this is a dream. It can't be happening. The permit made 3 long runs that over the next 10 minutes took all my fishing knowledge to keep it on the line and off the reef. I credit my ability to do the job to the 600 or 700 bonefish I caught and released to date while walking the flats. Even with that knowledge, I thought I would lose the battle several times when the force of the taut line exceeded its tested strength, or the permit came within yards of the reef. The water line on my shorts showed that what began as an ankle-deep hookup had at one point pulled me into waist-deep water. When I felt the fish giving in, I handed the 8-weight rod back to my client. He did a good job of executing instructions, working the rod to specified angles and various pressures that, over the last 20 minutes, steadily brought the permit toward shore. Now and then the fish would execute the permit broadside, turning its body perpendicular to the line and freezing the action. This is how the battle ended, with neither fisherman nor fish giving or taking any line. I had to retrieve this permit by hand over the last 10 yards, careful to hold the trophy underwater, sending water over its gills for revival. This is what the pilot is doing as he bids adieu to his catch. All the while, the co-pilot with the camera worked in the background to document the battle, proving to all that viewed the film that the tale told was more than a fishing yarn. I believe old Lefty Cray may have rolled over in his grave when he saw 3 blind mice score a beautiful permit on their first time out, or maybe he just had a good laugh. That's the moral to this Follow the Fishing episode. You've got to get out there and find out what will happen. Back at the clubhouse, the news of our catch was met with reserve. The event had somehow overturned what was common knowledge about catching permit. 2 weeks later, fate rubbed it in when I hooked and lost a permit on the first run, only to hook and land another minutes later. This run of luck is hard to explain. Early in this video, I said catching the permit changed my life to a degree, and it has, building a confidence and attitude towards fishing that seems to foster luck. Hope you enjoyed this episode. John Mitchell signing off.